I know that for a very long time, Juneteenth has been a closed practice. It has been something that seemingly held meaning only to people of color.
I like to say that Pittsford Village is everybody's village. You don't have to live in the village to feel connected to the village or to our community. And I was thinking about the first Juneteenth too, because what was so important about that was so many people didn't really know the story of Juneteenth. And it was just a wonderful opportunity to create that connection and acknowledge it, which we do as a village, as a national holiday. And we get the day off and everybody, that's part of our story. Not just the story of our Black history, but American history. So I'm so pleased that this celebration is continuing in our community. Absolutely.
People always think of Pittsford, oh, it's the affluent suburb. Well, maybe that's what it is now, but we started as an agricultural community. We were settled in 1789 by people who came to this community because they saw the rich soil, they saw the beautiful hills, and it was a great place for them to farm. Samuel Crump, he had such a great story. He was from England, and he and his wife came here to Pittsford. Actually, they came to Rochester first, and they were on their honeymoon. So they came from England to Rochester, spending their honeymoon, and he was reading the paper one day, and he saw that Pittsford was looking for a mason who could create a schoolhouse for us in Pittsford. And so he said, well, I'm a mason. I can do that. So the story is that he walked to Pittsford and he met with whoever was in charge, and he said, yes, I can do that. And he's the one who created the Cobblestone Academy at 17 Church Street that served as the district school number 6 from 1842 to 1892. And he decided to raise his family here. He and his wife had several children. She died. He married her sister, had more children with her. And that was a common thing. I know. I always think about that. It's a little freakish, but it happened all the time, because especially if you're a widower and you've lost your wife, you've got all these little children. Someone's got to watch them while you're out in the fields or running your business or whatever. And so the person you would know best would be your single sister-in-law. Okay. So there were multiple children that he had with both his wives. And so I don't know if he came here with an intention of wanting to be involved in the Underground Railroad or how that happened. We don't really have that information. But just the fact that we know how it happened because we have his granddaughter, Christine Crump-Hayner's account of how it would work. He'd find out that he was getting a package, and that package would be hidden in his wagon. And then when it was dark, he would take the package to the lake and they would cross over to Canada. And it's just so unusual to have that kind of information coming straight through the family. So it was just really interesting to learn about him and be able to share that with his family members. And they share information with me as well. But then to also learn about some of his other children that were very interested in abolition and the Underground Railroad. And it was something like you were just talking about, where he was passing down his belief that people should be treated respectfully and that it was important for them to do the right thing. And other members of his family continued to do that.
Understanding systemic racism is like playing a game of Blackjack 21. And you have a person sitting next to you, and it's like, duh, just play the ace and the jack. And you're looking at your hand and you have a 2, 3, a 4, a 5. And you're like, I don't have an ace and a jack. Well, if you play the ace and a jack, you'll win. Yes, but I don't have an ace and a jack. You know, like you can only play the cards that you have. And I just think that a lot of people are just unaware of how the deck is stacked against others. And again, it's not to take anything away from hard work that people do or any of their personal accomplishments. Like, it shouldn't be about you personally unless you're actively one of those people who are hurting others on purpose. But I'm going to assume you're not. It shouldn't be about you personally. It should be looking around and your environment and the system that was built. And are you going to continue to build bricks on that system, or are you going to change it up?
Well, what I found is that you're gonna into some individuals who look at you and make assumptions about your ability, your skill set, your background, or what have you. But you're also going to have some individuals who are open to learning more about you. Where I've run into problems is where people don't get to take the time to get to know me, to get to ask the questions, to get to understand the nuance of my lived experience. And quite frankly, Pearl, I would say that that's probably a challenge across various aspects of identity, in both directions to a certain extent. I have found over the years, and again, wisdom sometimes is it takes a while to get there. Is we have to take the time to get to know one another. We have to take the time to understand journeys because bias, stereotypes, and some of the more insidious things that kind of come out of that, it really comes from individuals who really don't know about or have taken the time to understand that person sitting across from them.
I think what I learned when I moved to Richmond and I was surrounded by a lot more ethnicity was that racism is real. When I was in Maryland, racism was more of just a joke and it wasn't really a concerning thing as I was quite young. And we would just say, honestly, kind of horrific things, but they were just things that we would repeat from what was around us, but it didn't really affect us. Um, However, moving to Richmond, they were a lot more hurtful when it was said to us by people with lighter skin. And it was the first time my eyes opened to racism and how harmful and the how terrible the effects actually are. My experience at Pittsford during the time of the pandemic was, I feel, a bit unique. I felt like the pandemic saved me a little bit from having to endure the terrors of high school racism and the extremes that would tell me to my face that my issues and my feelings did not matter.
We ended up here in Pittsford, mainly because my wife grew up here in Pittsford. She's a fourth generation Pittsford. Her, dad lived here, his dad lived here, and so she had a real connection to Pittsford. I really wasn't that crazy about living here initially because I'd lived here, of course, here before when I was going to college, and I briefly, right before I got married, bought a house in Pittsford because she had told me at the time that's where she wanted to live, and so by the time we got married, I already had bought the house here and discovered that it really wasn't a very friendly place, and so I didn't want to move back, but Linda really wanted our daughter to graduate from Sutherland where she went to school, and so um, she had been so wonderful in supporting me moving across the country for my job that there's nothing she would have asked I wouldn't have said yes to. So I said yes, but my heart was not in it. And sure enough, we got back here, and the first thing that we were hit with is there were racist flyers that were dropped off in that driveway of people's homes in Parenton and Pittsford. And my daughter came home one day when she started the sixth grade and said, "Daddy, they're saying they want to make Pittsford white again." And and I told them my dad's black and my mom's white, and what does that mean? And they said, "Well, your dad's going to have to move." And she says, "Where are they going to put you? Can we visit you? And why can't we just move with you?" And so I said, "Paris, honey, don't worry." I said, free speech is an important part of being in America. It's one of the things I value most about this country. Some people use it for hate, and some people use it for love. I said, we choose love. I said, how you know the difference, honey, is when people are speaking with hate or from a frame of hate, it usually is excluding somebody, and that's your sign. I said, and when you speak from a place of love, it's more inclusive. I said, so clearly that's a message of hate. I said, but we don't respond in hate. What we do is we need to find a loving response. I said, so let's wait till mommy come home and we'll talk about it as a family. And so that eventually led to us finding out that there was going to be a march in Pittsford going from the recreation center to the village. And of course, we had just moved back, so we didn't know anybody. And so we ended up participating in that march. The next day, though, I was surprised when I found out that they put my house on social media, and they posted this video of it's a white gentleman that back in the '60s worked with Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, that was trying to fight for change. And so he was being interviewed and asked questions around what's it like for him, as a white person fighting for this. He said, as a change agent, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, as a change agent, I expect to be shot, killed, or assassinated. It's just a matter of time. And they posted that next to my home address. And my wife saw it first. So Linda called me at work. I was at U of R at the time in that senior director of equity role. And she was panicked. She says, can you get home before 2? Our daughter getting off the bus. Call Sheriff Baxter, and who I knew, and I said, Zone A takes care of Pittsford. Should I be concerned? He said, yes, you should. He said, I'm not concerned about the people who posted it because they haven't broken any law. That somebody could see that in another state and jump in a car and decide to come and make you an example. He said, you've already broken a barrier. Being the first African American on a town board in its 200-year history, it would be a badge for somebody to take you out, more or less, right? So he said, what do you need? And I said, well, I just need some increased police presence, I said, until the threat goes away. So if you could just tell anybody if they're writing up a report or having lunch, killing time before or after shift, just park in front of my house, especially between 11 and 7 so we can sleep at night. And I'll do some, increase our security system to, increase our comfort level while we're in the house. And so that's what I did. I installed some cameras that were cellular based. We created a stress code. So if my daughter was forced in, or my wife was forced into the house, I would put a code in which would turn off the alarm, but immediately call the police. I installed the panic buttons on each floor, hidden where they knew where it was, but nobody did. So they could literally just press their back up against the wall and it would immediately call the police. And having to talk to my daughter about that was painful.
So part of history where Abraham signed the proclamation that was supposed to free the slaves. It didn't free all of the slaves. It only freed certain slaves in different territories and stuff. And it wasn't until December 4th of that year that they let the other slaves go. But when General Gordon came down there to Galveston, and he came up there and he told them, he said, yeah, he signed the proclamation a couple of years ago, but we just not getting to y'all. But y'all's free. And you're free, but you can't vote. You can't congregate together. You can't own land. You can't do this. You can't do that. And so it came with the black codes. But we was free.
Tell me a little bit about your experience of coming to Juneteenth in Pittsford.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, it's been uniformly positive in my case. One, I like I have enjoyed the breadth of different activities and within the main programs, the breadth of what's been presented that's related to the concept of Juneteenth. And one of them I think that I'm going to talk about, which is the wonderful storyteller who was there. And I'm listening to what she had to say, and she started explaining the meaning of a song that when I was a boy, my brothers and I loved this song. I don't know where we picked it up from. It's the Hambone song. Hambone, where you been? Around the world and back again. And, even now and then, now that we are obviously much older than just boys, every now and then when we're together, somebody will say, oh, yeah, Hambone, where you been? So to me, for all these years, the lyrics of that song were just sort of, I just thought, well, it's kind of a nonsense song or a silly song. It's just silly lyrics. And some songs are like that. So I go to the Juneteenth celebration, and the storyteller is telling the story and significance of the Hambone song, and not merely explaining the lyrics, line by line, but also explaining its significance in the context of Juneteenth, because this was a form of music that was adopted by Africans who were held in slavery and who weren't allowed to use drums. They came up with other methods of accompanying singing and songs, with other percussive methods and by other methods as well, including by voice. And so, once again, I thought, okay, so this funny little song that we liked as boys, this is very illustrative of some things that are quite important. And there's a lot more behind this than just a silly sounding song. It's anything but silly.
Hello, my name is Angela Amila Kalulu Lizette Taniguchi Uchi Amachibola Nakawatasi Waters, Bamford. And I am a Black Storytelling League of Rochester member, also a National Black Storytelling League member, and a UK one. I'm an International Poet of Merit Award winner as well. Oh, what am I going to share with you today? Let's see. I think I'll tell that story about Hambone. How Hambone sound? All right? Okay. So, see, what had happened was, back in the day, when the master and the missus and everybody was out there eating and stuff, well, after they got finished and they had nothing but the bone, the cook took the bone. Now, she wasn't going to let that bone go to waste, right? Because she was smart. So she said, he done gave me this bone. Now what can I do with this bone? She said, I know. And so she took it home. And she looked at the bone. She said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it in this pot of greens, and it's going to give my pot of greens flavor. So she said, those greens was just as good as that ham was. So she said, now, my neighbor, she don't have much either. And I am because you are, and you are because I am. That's our Ubuntu, And we have to remember each other, and this is how we had community back in the day. So she took that bone out that pot, took it over to her neighbors, and she said, here you go. Neighbor took that bone and she put it in her pot of green beans, and she said, Gave it flavor. It was good. That was good. So we had to carry it on. So she took it, when she got finished, she took it up gave it to her neighbor. And that bone went around from hut to hut, shack to shack. And that bone, it went round the world because that was their world. So they say, Hambone, Hambone, where you been? Hambone been around the world and back again. Now, they used to sing and dance and stuff. And the Jubel, Jube, they had a dance that they would do, for celebrations and events. And they combined that with the ham bone. And so we got the dance. And my father and them, they used to be sitting out on the porch or out in the yard or something that you hear them. And then they start beating on the legs and up to the chest and down to the legs. And some of them, they be getting it real good. I ain't that coordinated. But when you see them stepping, in the bands and stuff, that's part of the hambo. That's what we call hambo. They say, Hambone, where you been? Round the world and back again. Hambone, where's your wife? Out in the kitchen cooking rice. Hambone, where's your son? Down by the water having fun. Hambone, where you been? Round the world and back again. That's Hambone.
I think that it really was somewhat sort of insular, perhaps. And I think the village has always had, or Pittsford in general, has had that reputation. I'd like to think that I'm working hard, and we're all working hard to really improve that and to get back to the events and the things that are happening and the fact that they're increasing. I think that's another way of really opening up the village, being more inclusive and creating connection. For now, we host the Harvest Moon Festival, which embraces the celebration within the Asian community, not just here in the village, but absolutely regionally. I'm so pleased that they've come back into the village, and now we're hoping it'll become an annual event, and it's been growing every year. Those things are important. It's important that we share our village with people, but also with a wider range of people.
When you have a large group of families that are distinctly looking to raise their children in a safe environment with good schools, you end up with a place that can support a bookshop like this, because there's still a lot of people not just investigating intellectual pursuits or reading for fun, but those are essential components to some extent of the results of creating a successful community. And things like taking your kids to the bookstore is at once a privilege. It's also the result of a lot of years of grooming for success. That's how successful families move their children into positions to take the next steps in life, succeeding at school, developing communication skills, developing even moral and ethical foundations. A lot of this stuff comes from pursuing these things in books. There's still a lot of books that are very relevant to the education that America needs, and that we need after we've graduated from college and while we're just living in the community. And these things ought to be more a part of our conversation. One of the factors that I think is out there for many groups that are oppressed is we want people to know that we exist. We want to stake a claim that it's okay to be us. And this is where I think there's a tremendous woven and distinct meeting that these disenfranchised communities have with books, because and with this banning of books and with the banning of the voices we have an opportunity to move forward, but it's going to involve looking at what we have done as a nation, as individuals, as participants in the nation, and a lot of these confrontations with ourselves, with our past, with our present, are presented to us where we can meet them on our own in a book. And they are in histories, they're in novels, and they're in bookstores. And once we engage with those ideas, we can discuss them in a more public setting, and hopefully in our government settings, in our school settings, and we can begin to move forward. But right now, it's become almost a pitched battle just to access these ideas, and that's one of the reasons we're here. We're going to have some of these ideas ready for you.
Do you think Juneteenth is for everyone?
Yeah, I think it's for everyone. I think one of the most profound places that exists in the world, in America especially, is this place of division where we have racial divide, and it's easy enough to blur it if you want to, and to come up with all kinds of non-racial reasons why one's on one side of the divide or the other. But there is, in fact, an enormous chasm between the races in America, between African Americans, white Americans, and how we got here is really important, and what's going on that keeps us here is really important. We're not gonna move on without it. And if we want to live lives that are beautiful, if we want to give ourselves to something beyond ourselves, if we want to live fully, we have to be honest, and we have to be truthful, and we have to have compassion for each other. If we're going to understand the earth, if we're going to understand how beautiful this world is that we found a chance to be in through God's grace, you have to accept God's grace. You have to accept how wonderful it really is, and you're not going to get there by climbing in your pickup, and getting in your big house, and truth is for everybody.
Well, in order, because it's Juneteenth, I'll do my first poem that I did, and it's called Freedom Bound. It says, freedom bound used to be a dream. Freedom bound now means everything. Freedom bound years ago used to be a joke, but only to the colored folks. Freedom bound in the years of yesterday used to be a prayer and a reason to strive and fight for today. Now, in the year of today, we must fight, strive, and yes, pray hard, so today won't be only another yesterday. Freedom bound, what it holds for me is pain, struggle, and a longing of freedom. With my head set high and my eyes towards the sky, looking up for help, 'cause freedom bound is where I'll be. Freedom bound, freedom bound. Freedom bound must come to us all. Freedom bound, say amen, amen. Freedom bound. Catch me if you can.
This is kind of where the problem lies in our society, right? Is that you have a lot of people who know that um, they weren't raised in the culture. They know that there's problems, but they also don't know how to access, like how do you like get yourself involved in things without being the outsider, without being, in a way that is respectful but also meaningful. And it's a question that I think we're probably going to have to continue to try to figure out for a
Yeah.
while, right? How
Yeah.
how do we engage? But
What do you think?
I think that Juneteenth is for everyone. I think that Kwanzaa is a Black American holiday, and it'll be a little bit weird if white people just randomly started celebrating Kwanzaa. That would be like, unless like my husband's white, like he celebrates Kwanzaa with us, but just like randomly without any
Right.
connection to the culture to just start celebrating Kwanzaa is a little bit strange for me. But Juneteenth is really, I see Juneteenth as the culmination of freedom that was promised at the beginning. Right. I just spent 5 weeks in Boston and we learned about the history of slaves very early on in the 1600s in the colonies, right? And again, the question of freedom came up with the Revolutionary War. It's like, oh, you're talking about freedom and not being oppressed by other people. Can we talk about our situation? And
Right.
that was, of course, squashed. But there are many years coming, and there's been this duality in American thinking about who we see as people, who we see as citizens, very, very much like Romanesque, where, you know, a citizen has rights and we're equitable, but also not everyone's a citizen. And so that we had a lot of that. And so for me, Juneteenth, because again, it wasn't just Black people fighting. It was mostly white people fighting in the Civil War, and mostly
Yeah,
a
that's a
lot
good
of
point.
money and things. And so, is that not also a celebration for all the abolitionists that worked hard, for all of the people in the Underground Railroad who risked everything to
Right.
house people? Like, that is Juneteenth. It's not just the people who were freed finally, but it's all of the people who worked and cried and fought and died for that to happen. And that was not just Black people.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that. And I think that's right. I guess I'm just sort of thinking that we're maybe not there yet, but like I agree that that would be nice. And like I think like we could be there, like if people did it the right way. I think it's like it really complicated history of our country that is a long time ago, and we're seeing that we're really not that far removed from it still, and a lot of these issues are still there. So, um, and that happened with our first Juneteenth. It wasn't all, it wasn't all red velvet cake, so to say. It was, there's some challenges, and I think there still are, like we've seen that. So, but I think I like that we did it, and that does sort of, to me, like lean more towards the like it should be for everyone thing than to keep it exclusive.